everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I'm going to do my August wrap-up. So I have 8 books to talk about, and I'm going to start off talking about the non-fiction that I read in August. So first of all, I read Austen Years, a memoir and 5 novels by Rachel Cohen. I got this from the publisher as a NetGalley, and I started it in July because of Jane Austen July. This is sort of a combination of a memoir of the author, a brief Jane Austen biography, and some literary criticism of Jane Austen's novels. So the author had a period of her life that she was rereading Jane Austen's novels, and during this time she went through quite big changes in her own life. She went through grief because of her father passing. She had 2 children and became a mother. And she moved houses. Various things around her, like politics and everything, was changing, and she found a lot of comfort in reading and rereading Jane Austen's writing. And a lot of this book is sort of a meditation of what Jane Austen's work has meant for her as a reader, and also some of the things that she's discovered through rereading these works, and some of the things that she's seeing through knowing about Jane Austen's life. So that is where the biography comes in, when she looks into Austen's life and how that influenced her writing. So I really enjoyed this as a thought experiment. I found that it made me think a lot about how a reader can connect with a writer's body of work in a very intimate and strong, emotionally way, especially when you sort of revisit the same things over and over again over the course of your life. Some of the parts to do with the literary criticism also surprised me, and I found were quite interesting and added something to my own thinking about Austen's works. For example, she mentioned something about Austen having sometimes almost playwright descriptions of what the characters are doing or how they are moving in space. I made that actually as a point in the review that I wrote, so I will link that below if you're interested in more of my thoughts. In the end, it's sort of a little bit too fragmented, the 3 parts. They don't come fully together for me. It wasn't a complete success in terms of the execution, I think, but the reading experience was quite fun for me anyway, and made me think about especially because I just finished reading through Jane Austen's bibliography in July, and having this as a follow-up was a really nice transition. The next nonfiction I read was The Language of the Universe, a visual exploration of maths by Colin Stewart, and illustrated by Zemo Abadia. This is somewhere in between a graphic nonfiction and a picture book. It's, I think, about 70 pages or so, maybe 80. And it's basically what it says, a visual representation of maths in various aspects of the natural sciences. So it explores biology, chemistry, astronomy, and physics, and other areas that mathematical principles work, and tries to explain what they mean and how they work in a concrete sense in the universe, in the world. And especially the illustrations, I think, make this so much more digestible, and also a very beautiful thing to read and to have. So I got this again as a NetGalley, and I'll just show you an example. Like this, I found fascinating. The fact that the zebra's pattern, when they are together as a herd, the patterns are they are sort of a continuation. So it's very difficult for predators to distinguish individual animals. There's a lot of various ideas and concepts that are being illustrated in a really beautiful and also really imaginative way, for me at least. Like, this is talking about shapes and what is the best shape. I've been looking into sort of easy entryway kind of mathematic nonfiction, and so this was a perfect starting point for me. And as I said, I would definitely recommend this both for younger readers, but also for adult readers who, like me, don't feel very comfortable in these sort of areas. I mean, some of the concepts are very basic basic and sort of the foundational things, and some of them you're probably already familiar with, but I think overall it never feels condescending or too simplistic. It's just very factual and makes you marvel at the world. The last nonfiction book I read in August was The Sculptor's Daughter by Tove Jansson. So if you haven't seen it already, I did a Tove in August video where I mentioned that I wanted to read some of Tove Jansson's writing in August to celebrate her birthday month. This year her birthday was a flag day in Finland, which was really exciting, so I wanted to celebrate that in any way I could. So this was the first one I got to in the month, and it is basically a memoir of her childhood. So it's sort of a time capsule of early to mid 20th century Scandinavia. Her style of writing is very similar to her fiction writing, so this is sort of structured as vignettes, the chapters, and it's kind of similar to the summer book in the kind of themes that it explores as well. But this is particularly looking at childhood and nostalgia and a child's perspective on the world, like childhood innocence, the way that a child thinks about the world in very simple terms, some of it in a beautiful way. For example, in the beginning of the book she mentions that her grandfather, I think, tells her that God lives on the mountain, so she and her cousin looks for a physical being on the mountain. That kind of just accepting things as they are, a very direct sense of a child's way of being, is something that I found really beautiful and charming about this book. There's also the other side of that kind of perspective of a young person and immaturity, especially in terms of pettiness and jealousy of other people getting attention over you or being better at something than you are. So there's those two sort of contradictory sides of being a child. The one thing that I didn't like about this book is that there's sometimes offhanded comments that I found offensive, especially related to disability, and I think probably wasn't ill-intended, but I thought it was thoughtless, and I was surprised because I haven't seen this kind of mentality in her writing before. But the other one that I read by her in the month is The True Deceiver. This is one of the best pieces of her work that I read. This is a novel about two women in particular. One is Anna. She lives in a house that she has inherited from her parents, sort of on the outbrink of a village, very close to the woods. And she doesn't have a lot of interaction with the people in the village. She has one woman who comes to her house and cleans and gets her groceries once in a while. And that's pretty much all of the connection she has. And then the other woman is Katri, does some kind of work with numbers and helps people out with various financial conflicts over, like people fighting over money over various things. So she helps out with a lot of people in the village, but no one really likes her. She has a younger brother that she takes care of. She has decided that she wants the house that Anna owns and lives in. So she sort of set her eyes on the house and wants to get it in any way she can. So she starts to entangle herself into Anna's life, and this book is sort of following the way that interaction is looking and how that unfolds. Of course, it's a very close character study with a particular sort of very much focusing in on the psychology of Anna and Katri and the interaction and how Katri is influencing other people around her. I thought that this showed the skill of Tove in, as I said previously, sort of dealing with contradictions and opposites in her writing and themes, both beauty and ugliness, and sort of harshness and openness, and those sort of very strong contrasts in her imagination and in her work. So definitely recommend this one. Then I read a comic this month, and that was Snapflash Hustle Volume 1 by Pat Shand and Emily Pearson. Emily Pearson is the illustrator of this. And so this is a Volume 1. I'm not sure if there's going to be more volumes. I hope there will be, because for me this first volume isn't enough to explore the complexity that this this first volume sort of starts to build. Basically, this is about a woman who wants to make a living as a model. So she's very active on social media, on Instagram, and she uses a hashtag that sort of gets her work with a photographer. And during this meeting with a photographer, she ends up being involved in a drug cartel deal, and she becomes entangled into this drug market business that uses social media, and especially Instagram models, as their cover for the work that they're doing illegally, obviously. And so it ends up being kind of a thriller, and also with social media elements to it, sort of commentary on that, and it has some modern sensibilities because of that, and I really enjoyed reading this one. I think it's quite fun in terms of the social media thing. That was something that I really enjoyed in Snot Girl as well, which is kind of what I was looking for, more kind of comics with a similar style. And the drug market and the interaction between the main character, who's called Haley, and the people in the drug market is quite interesting. It's very tense, and it's also just sort of about her relationships and trying to make a living and trying to support herself and figure out what she wants to do with her life. And I also really enjoyed the art. It has a very strong pink hue, which is the part of the reason that I was so drawn to this. I enjoyed it, but I think there isn't enough in this one volume to understand the characters fully and know where they're going with the story. So I hope that they will continue with this one. But it was a solid first volume. And then I read Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, and this was the reason I was reading it in August was because of Onyx Page's slow read-along that she's doing, I think, for 2 years' time. I will link the announcement video for that slow read-along below. It is following a woman in the 70s. She's black, and she ends up traveling back into time in the mid-19th century, I want to say, in a time and place where slavery is still very much prevalent. So she ends up traveling into a location that is quite dangerous for her. The reason that she starts time traveling in the first place is because of a young boy who is white. He is in fatal danger, and that for some reason that propels her to travel back in time and save him. And the first time she does this, he's a young boy. The second time that she travels back into his timeline, he's like a teenager, and each time that she travels back in time to him, time moves like several years in between for him, but for her it's only minutes or hours between the trips. Of course, it's talking a lot about racism and slavery history and the kind of lives that black people lived during this time, and how, I mean, it's very violent because of the subject matter, and in many ways it feels like there's a lot of trauma in the kind of stories that Octavia Butler tells in this book, but I found it compulsive and so immersive and just really well written. A lot of Kindred ends up being about the conflicting feelings that Dana has in saving Rufus' life, the boy who is the son of a slaveholder, and as he grows older he becomes a slaveholder himself. She has very complicated feelings in helping him, and she has her own reasons for doing so. There's a constant conflict between Dana and Rufus, and her trying to make him understand why what he's doing is wrong, and him constantly trying to hold her back in his time and to keep control. Next we have Crookedelujah by Kelli Jo Ford, which is another recent release, came out in July. And this one is by a Cherokee Nation author, and it's following 4 generations of women starting in the 70s. So we have, when the book opens, we have Granny, who is the grandmother, and she's a very religious woman. Then we have her adult daughter, Lula, who is similarly very religious in the end because of her mother and her mother's influence. And then we have Lula's teenage daughter, Justine. And Justine has just found out that she's pregnant when the book opens. So we have these three women and the daughter that Justine is pregnant with, so a fourth coming. And a lot of this book is mother-daughter relationships and in particular burdens that you can pass on to the new generation and sort of inheritance of burdens. The choices that one mother makes and how she lives her life, how that shapes the kind of life that the next generation makes and has, the circumstances that they have, the options that they have as well for how they live. And often it ends up being the daughters trying to move away from everything that their mothers did before them. But also all of these women have complicated relationships with men. Those complications also influence the way that the daughters of those relationships decide on how they live with other men. So it's just I think in terms of the themes, I really enjoyed reading this one. I think there's a lot of good commentary on all of the things that I just mentioned. For me, the story didn't really come together. It just sort of petered out in the end and didn't seem to have a strong point overall. Like, didn't have a strong direction in my opinion. So it seemed like it was veering off into various directions. And the setting itself is quite interesting for me. It's very different from what I usually read. A lot of it takes place in Texas, which is an area and a kind of location and setting that I'm not very familiar with. Finally, the last book I read in August was The Sign of the Four. You're gonna be seeing this particular bind up at least two times more because this includes all of the novels of Sherlock Holmes. It's the deluxe edition by Penguin, if you were wondering. So The Sign of the Four is another reread for me. The only one in this bind-up that I haven't read before is The Valley of Fear. But the next one we'll be reading is The Hound of Baskervilles. Anyway, I'm reading the Sherlock Holmes books with Amelia and Roxy, and we have such good discussions about these books. So The Sign of the Four is the second book in the Sherlock Holmes story or series. We follow Sherlock and Watson a bit into their friendship. They've sort of become accustomed to each other, and especially Watson, I think, is quite good at reading Sherlock's moods and knowing when to interrupt him and sort of take him out of himself and when to leave him space, especially because The Sign of the Four opens with Sherlock using drugs. So it's the mystery itself is my least favorite in this book in comparison to the other works that I read of the Sherlock Holmes series, and that is the main reason for that is because of the inherent racism and colonialism aspects to the story. It's a lot about an Indian location. There's some things to do with the mystery that is so like foreigners or savages, that kind of mentality that I just don't get on with. And it isn't necessarily that this is that this only occurs in this book in the Sherlock Holmes stories, or that is in any way unique for this period of time. It's just that it's very prevalent in the story because the whole case is related to Indian treasure. The things that I liked in it is what I usually like them at best in these stories, and that is Sherlock and Watson's interaction and friendship and the way that is developing and deepening, and how much compassion is between them, how much understanding for the other's differences and appreciation as well for the other's differences. That is much more mutual than sometimes is shown in the adaptations. At least that is how I'm reading these books. I am enjoying the discussions around these stories and the characters as much as I am the discussion sort of about the writing context that Arthur Conan Doyle is coming from, and his time frame and historical setting and the kind of ideas of the time and of publishing as well. So I'm looking to pick up an Arthur Conan Doyle biography soon, hopefully, as a companion to reading through the series. So that is the last thing I read in August. Let me know if you've read any of these books and your thoughts about them. I always enjoy hearing your points of view on the things that I'm reading or otherwise. If you read anything good in August, I would love to know about that as well in the comments. I hope you're doing well and you're taking care of yourselves. I will talk to you soon.